Okay, so now we're going to finish up the diseases of the skin and then look at the eye. Next, we've got impetigo, which is another very common ailment of small children. This is going to be a superficial type infection, so it's going to be higher up, just maybe on the surface of the skin. This is going to be caused usually by Staphylococcus aureus or Streptococcus pyogenes. If you have an endogenous or outside source, that's often going to be Streptococcus pyogenes. Remember, Streptococcus pyogenes can secrete streptokinase, and that can cause it can cause impetigo. It also can cause itself coat itself with the host proteins, which helps it to evade our defenses. Strep pyogenes can also cause, just as a side note, necrotizing fasciitis and scarlet fever as well. And so this is going to be transmitted by direct contact. And often what will happen is you may have a child that has perhaps maybe mosquito bites, and they start scratching them, and that allows the bacteria to invade that particular area of the skin, and then they scratch that area and go to the next and scratch that, and so then they wind up with these lesions kind of all over their body. All right, and so it can cause the skin to flake or peel. It can also be caused by a mixture of Staph aureus or Strep pyogenes. Okay, Strep pyogenes is usually going to be the first, and then later on Staph aureus can take over. Okay, and that's going to produce a bacteriocidin that can actually destroy the pyogenes. So it kind of gets rid of its competition, so to speak. And so signs and symptoms here, we're going to have that peely, crusty skin, scabs. Lesions can be in the mouth, the face, or extremities. It can have an exfoliative type of toxin, which is going to be toxin A and B, which can cause a blistering and facilitate spread of the bacteria. When it's caused by pyogenes, that's going to be a gram-positive cocci. It is going to have a beta hemolysis or hemolytic on blood agar, so you'll see that on blood agar. And it can cause pharyngitis, scarlet fever, pneumonia, puerperal fever, necrotizing black fasciitis, and serious bloodstream infections. Okay, as it can also cause some post-streptococcal conditions. So this is normally a very minimal thing, but if you let it get out of bounds, so to speak, and don't treat it, then it can become more problematic. And so these bacteria just have a huge arsenal of enzymes and toxins. So, like I said, it can be followed from one bacteria to the other. If you have strep pyogenes, you can occasionally, very, very rarely, I should say, very rarely, have that progress to acute post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. Okay, there are some strains that can cause or these strains that cause impetigo do not go on to rheumatic fever, which can sometimes happen with strep infections, okay, but not in this case. Impetigo is most often going to be caused in newborns by pyogenes, and then aureus is going to be usually what you find in older children, okay, but both can cause an infection in either age group, okay. So here's some really good information about these two bacterium to put on your flashcards. They're both gram-positive, so you have your Staph aureus and your Strep pyogenes. They're both spread by contact, okay? You can see Staph aureus, you would want to put that it has an exfoliative toxin and coagulase. Pyogenes, you need to know streptokinase, hyaluronidase particularly. The other two, not as much. I mean, I would be familiar with them. They're both prevented by being clean and having really good hygiene, okay? So Staph aureus is going to be more serious because of the potential of MRSA, and pyogenes is kind of just considered a concerning effect. And so if you have older children, you want to think Staph aureus. Newborns, you're more likely to see strep pyogenes. All right, so cellulitis. This is caused by a very fast spreading infection in the dermis and in the subcutaneous tissue, okay? And so this can again be caused by Staphylococcus aureus, or Streptococcus pyogenes. Okay, so cellulitis would be another disease that they can cause. And you're going to see very painful, very red, swollen, warm area. All right. You can also see some swelling in the lymph nodes. Okay. You can have a lymphangitis where you have red lines leading away from the area, okay, that are visible. That is because of the microbes and inflammatory products that are being carried away by the lymphatic system. If you do see that, you need to get treatment right away. Bacteremia can develop, but uncomplicated cellulitis can have a good prognosis, okay? All right, so you'll see this a lot in immunocompromised individuals. So you'll see a lot of the elderly population have this. Any bacterium and some fungi can cause this. Infants, you're going to see more group B streptococci. This is going to be usually you're going to get this after some kind of introduction of bacteria or fungi into the dermis, a trauma. Sometimes it can be subtle, you don't see it, so there's not like an obvious break in the skin. You're going to diagnose this by those clinical signs and symptoms, looking at that rash. A mild cellulitis can respond very well to oral antibiotics, especially those that are like cifoxan are going to be effective against Staph aureus and Staph pyogenes. Streptococcus pyogenes. More involved infections in patients that are immunocompromised, the elderly, you're going to often have to be hospitalized and have IV antibiotics, okay? Occasionally, you will have to see some debridement to remove damaged tissue. So here's the breakdown here, Staph aureus and Strep pyogenes. Occasionally other bacteria can do this as well. Parenteral implantation just means through a break in the skin, okay? And so gram-positive, clinical signs, exfoliative toxin coagulase for MRSA, streptokinase, hyaluronidase are very important for Strep pyogenes, and that is going to affect vulnerable populations. All right, so now we're looking at staphylococcal scalded skin syndrome, SSSS, okay? And so this is a dermolytic condition. Dermolytic means capable of damaging the skin, the dermis, okay? Here we're talking about it being caused by Staphylococcus aureus. This can affect mostly newborns and babies, sometimes children and adults. You're going to have what's called a bullous-type lesion that's going to appear around the umbilical area, often in neonates. Sometimes in the diaper area or the armpit axilla area as well. And then you can actually have a split occur in the epidermal tissue, the layers just above the stratum basale here, and you're going to have this split. And so that can cause widespread, what we call desquamation of the skin. So squamous desquamation, that basically means the skin is peeling off. So after a sunburn, when your skin peels, that's going to be desquamation, okay? De-squamous process of taking away squamous cells, okay, which are those layers that makes that keratinization. And so this can be caused by Staph aureus, Staph aureus, which is gram-positive, and it has been gone through lysogeny by bacteriophage, which has given it a gene for the exfoliative toxin, which is what causes, it's toxin A or B, which is what causes the skin to basically peel off, not pure. Okay, it can also cause some meningitis. You can have some lesions like vernicles and carbuncles or impetigo with Staph aureus as well. So this can be transmitted by a caregiver when the bacterium from one baby, or where you pick it up from one baby to another via direct droplet contact. 30% of adults are asymptomatic carriers, and so they can actually be harboring this bacterium in their nasopharynx, axilla, perineum, even the vagina, all right, and not know it. And so diagnose this through clinical signs and symptoms. You can prevent this by preventing carriers from having contact with neonates. Of course, that requires you to know that you are a carrier, okay? So intermediate treatment here is going to be with systemic antibiotics like cloaxilin. And again, this affects mostly newborns and babies and causes that split in the skin. So you would want to add this to your card for Staph aureus. You would want to add that it has the exfoliative toxins A and B, that it can cause scalded skin syndrome primarily in neonates. So we have a few diseases here that can cause a vesicular or pustular type rash. These are going to be smallpox and chickenpox primarily. Chickenpox is very common and fairly benign. Smallpox, even one case of smallpox, is considered a public health emergency. Smallpox is arguably one of the worst diseases to ever hit mankind. I really believe if we had a resurgence of one of these extremely serious diseases, we would no longer have an anti-vaccination movement. We've not been stricken with these very, very serious diseases as we once were, thankfully, due to the progress of vaccinations. So these are both viral diseases, and they present as this generalized rash. Pox is going to be an individual lesion that contains fluid. Smallpox lesions are going to be filled with a clear fluid. Chickenpox will be not quite so clear. Okay, you will have a fever and abundant rash after an incubation period of 10 to 20 days. A rash beginning on the scalp, face, and trunk and it's going to radiate with sparse crops to the extremities. Okay, skin lesions are going to quickly form macules and papules and itchy vesicles with that clear fluid for smallpox. They're going to crust over after several days and heal completely, or you can leave a small scar. Lesions can number from a few to hundreds. And you can see that in this picture down here from smallpox, okay? This is chickenpox up here, and then this is smallpox. And you can see this is very devastating, okay? Very, very bad stuff. Not just because of the rash. I'm just going to get rid of this again. Okay, so then with smallpox, those lesions are going to crust over and drop off after several days and heal completely, leave a scar. Those scabs that drop off are contagious, okay? Chickenpox lesions are going to be kind of opaque and indented a little more in the Caesar. The distribution is going to be more in the center of the body, more centripetal than the extremities. Usually lasts 4 to 7 days. New lesions will stop appearing after 5 days. Patients are contagious until all of the lesions have crusted over. 1% of these cases are followed by encephalopathy, which can be fatal, but in most cases recovery is complete. Occasionally you can have some cases where if they get it in their eyes, they have blindness. Okay, so we're going to look a little bit more at smallpox. All right, so next NCLEX practice question. A patient has been diagnosed with impetigo but has been non-compliant with medical treatment. What future association or complication is associated with untreated impetigo? All right, and hopefully you remember that that is D, glomerulonephritis. And again, that's very rare. You can also get strep throat or scarlet fever. And so this is actually results from the immune system fighting off the group A strips. So the human herpes virus 3 can cause chickenpox, and it can also cause shingles. This is going to use the respiratory epithelium as a portal of entry. And what can happen is after you get, or when you get the initial chickenpox infection, it can become latent in the dorsal root ganglia that serve different dermatomes, which is areas of the skin that nerves innervate, okay, and serve. And so the human is going to be the reservoir, and this can cause, of course, chickenpox and then that latent virus of shingles. And it's the sensory endings of the spinal nerve branches that is going to enter and just kind of sit there, okay? And so it can then reemerge as shingles after being reactivated by things like stress, immunosuppressive agents, other illnesses, any type of other thing that can cause a reemergence there. And it's going to cause this asymmetrical skin lesion on the trunk or head. The virus is going to migrate down that nerve ganglion to the skin and cause a very, very painful rash. Multiplication of the virus can then resume. It can produce a crop of these little persistent blistery type vesicles. Inflammation of the ganglia and nerve pathways, and so it's going to cause extreme pain and tenderness that can last for months. It can also involve the cranial nerves that can lead to inflammation of the eyes and facial paralysis as well. Human herpes virus 3 is going to be spread via droplet contact. The humans are the only natural host. It will then cause the chickenpox illness. It's going to be harbored in the respiratory tract. It is going to be spread via respiratory droplets or fluid from active lesions. People can acquire chickenpox from exposure to the fluid from those lesions of infected persons. A day or two also prior to the development of the rash, you can catch it from someone with it as well. Chickenpox is so contagious that if you think you may possibly exposed to it, you are probably going to get it. Okay. So human herpes virus 3 is also known as varicella. This is an enveloped DNA virus. It's going to attach to the respiratory mucosa and invade and enter the bloodstream from there. And so you will have a subsequent viremia that's going to disseminate to the skin, where it's going to cause adjacent cells to fuse and lyse together and cause the characteristic chickenpox lesion. It's then going to enter your sensory, or it can enter, doesn't always, your sensory nerves and dorsal root ganglia and sit there for and be latent in that nerve ganglia. Okay. So what is prevention here is going to be vaccination, the live attenuated vaccine. Okay. It is important to note that you must have boosters of these in order to prevent getting this as an adult, which is particularly important for males because it can cause sterility. So I kind of have mixed feelings about this vaccination. So it is, there is Zostavax, which is an approved attenuated vaccine from 2006, and that can be used to prevent shingles. The uncomplicated course of varicella is self-limiting and doesn't really acquire a therapy other than alleviation of discomfort, which is often going to be calamine lotion, things to stop the itching generally. Secondary bacterial infections can occur. These can be treated with a topical antibiotic or systemic if bad enough. You can take acyclovir, which is oral, to those that are at risk for complications, which is an antiviral. Okay. It is extremely important to not give aspirin to any child under the age of 18, particularly if they have chickenpox, if they have a human herpes virus 3, because this may cause Reye's syndrome, R-E-Y-E-S. Oh, okay, it's on the side here. And so, again, that is very important. We do not give anyone under the age of 18 aspirin during an illness where they have fever, unless we know for sure what it is, because of this particular complication of Reye's syndrome. Which is really important because I remember back in the 60s and 70s, we just ate baby aspirin like candy. So I'm pretty sure that's probably when it was discovered. So no aspirin for children. All right, so back to smallpox. So smallpox is, like I said, arguably one of the most serious diseases that we have encountered. It is considered a disease of the past, largely due to an effort by the World Health Organization. Okay. After we had some bioterrorism incidents with anthrax in 2001, the United States began taking the threat of using smallpox as a bioterroristic weapon very seriously. Vaccination had been discontinued because the disease had been considered eradicated, but it is now offered to certain populations in the U.S. We've got two forms, variola major and variola minor. Okay. The signs and symptoms are going to be fever, malaise. Malaise is just a general feeling of unwellness, and a rash that begins in the pharynx and spreads to the face and progresses to the extremities. And you can see this is a very comprehensive rash, which is everywhere. It is macular and papular. Also, you'll see vesicular and pustular type lesions with this. They will crust over and leave sites pitted with scar tissue. Okay. Variola major is very, very virulent, all right? This can cause a toxemia, shock, and intravascular coagulation. This is very important to recognize the signs and symptoms of smallpox. The prodrome period is going to have a very high fever and malaise, and then you will first see that rash in the mouth, a severe abdominal back abdominal and back pain, sorry, and the rash will spread throughout the entire body within 24 hours. After the third or fourth day, the bumps of the rash are going to become larger and filled with a very thick, now opaque type of fluid. Pustules are going to be indented and begin to scab over within a few days. After 2 weeks, most of the lesions are going to have crusted over, but the patient is still contagious until those scabs fall off, till the very last scab falls off. During the rash, the patient is very, very ill. Lesions heal. Of course, they're going to leave scars. And like I said a few slides ago, if there's just a single case, this is considered a health and law enforcement emergency. Okay, very, very horrible disease here. And so this bottom picture here, you can see the scar tissue, and the top are the characteristic lesions of smallpox. So variola minor, of course, is minor, so it's not near as difficult as a disease. You have the rash is less dense, the patient is less ill. These are both caused by orthopox virus, which is an enveloped DNA virus. It includes this family includes monkeypox and vaccinia. This is a very hardy virus. It can survive outside the host a lot longer than many viruses can. This is spread through droplets. You can also spread it through fomites like contaminated bedding, contaminated clothing. This is endemic to 31 countries, or was endemic to 31 different countries in the 1970s. 10 to 15 million people contracted the disease every year, and 2 million died from it. That is a lot of people. And so we began a massive vaccination effort over an 11-year period that eradicated the disease. The last known case was in Somalia in 1977. So hopefully that will be the last case ever. So vaccination for post-exposure can be given as a prophylactic treatment. There is no treatment for smallpox. There is no cure. The best treatment is vaccination. And this one is vitally important that we keep going. So here's that really good breakdown here of your treatments, culture, virulence factors, those sorts of things. So that brings us to leishmaniasis. This is a zoonotic manifestation here that is transmitted between mammal hosts, generally by female sandflies. This is found in equatorial regions that are going to give favorable conditions for the sandfly. So this makes travelers and immigrants at high risk, okay? And so you're going to see a cutaneous leishmaniasis of the skin, a localized infection in the capillaries, okay? There's also a mucocutaneous leishmaniasis, which you can find in Central and South America. We do not have a vaccine for this, okay? You need to look at it under the microscope in order to diagnose. We have two causative agents here, Leishmania tropica and Leishmania brassicinalis. And so the best way to prevent this is to avoid the sandfly. We do not have a vaccine, okay? All right, so Bacillus anthracis is a gram-positive bacterium. This is going to cause cutaneous anthrax. There are other forms that we will look at as well. This is going to be transmitted via endospore that is going to gain entry to the skin through a small cut or abrasion. The pathogen is then going to germinate and grow and produce a papule that is then going to become necrotic and rupture, forming this black scar that you can see in this picture at right. This can, even though this is only the cutaneous form and it is less fatal than the others, it is still fatal up to 20% of the time without treatment, but with treatment only 1%. You need microscopic visualization in order to diagnose. Also looking, of course, at the symptoms here. The vaccine is only available for the high risk or people in the military here, okay? And again, you catch this via endospore, come in contact with the endospores. And so 11 cases of anthrax, cutaneous anthrax, occurred in the U.S. About a decade ago, a little more than a decade ago, along with 11 inhalational cases when endospores were actually sent through the mail via an act of bioterrorism, which was a pretty scary time. Just a note on the anthrax, you can actually get that by coming in contact with the skin of animals that have had this, sheep or goats often. Also, I was talking about the mailers going out with anthrax. We even had some of that occur as nearby as New Boston, Texas. Okay, so that's what I was saying. People were really worried about the mail. Anybody that worked in the Postal Service was also, of course, very scared because somebody was just mailing these out to high-profile people like politicians and that type of thing. So it was pretty rough. So anyway, here's a good comparison chart here and some details here you can put on your flashcard. Start one for Bacillus anthracis. We will put all three forms on here, including the respiratory, and we'll add all three of those forms. Gram-positive, it does have endospores. It can have a capsule. It has lethal factor, and it has edema factor, which we will look at again as well. And that edema factor can cause this cutaneous form to have a very large swelling area here. Okay. No vaccine. Well, it has a vaccine, but it is not used unless you are high risk or in the military. Ciprofloxacin and other antibiotics in conjunction with that, and it can be fatal if it's left untreated. Leishmaniasis, SPP, by the way, means species, so there are several Leishmaniasis species here that we have to look at. The vector is the sandfly. Let's see. Prevention is avoiding the sandfly. I would definitely know that it has a mucocutaneous and systematic form. Untreated, if it is visceral, is 100%. Okay, 10% for cutaneous. So visceral would be of your visceral organs. All right, so that can be quite dangerous. All right, so here we have some fungi. We have cutaneous and superficial mycoses here, dermatophytes. This is a group of fungi here that cause a variety of body skin conditions, and these are confined to the non-living epidermal tissues, which is going to be stratum corneum, and their derivatives, which is going to be things like your hair and nails. So all these conditions have names beginning with tinea. All right, so that's derived from the belief that they were once caused by worms, which they are not. Okay, so if you learn anything in this class, you need to know that ringworm is not caused by a worm. Okay, if you don't already know that, it is fungal. All right, these can be transmitted human to human, animal to human, soil, or fomite to human as well, and you definitely need to know these. So tinea capitis, that's going to be the scalp. Okay, the scalp area, and you see it's also head, eyebrows, eyelashes, and then you have tinea barbae, which is a little less known, tinea corporis. This is the one you're probably most familiar with. This is where you can see this anywhere on the skin, and this gives you that classic ringworm look. Ringworm of the groin, which is also known as jock itch, is going to usually be tinea curius. All right, tinea pedis is going to be athlete's foot. Okay, and then if you get it in the fingernails, like if you go to a nail salon and they don't practice proper hygiene, you can get tinea unguineum. All right, so be sure you know these. All right, so a little more detail on some of these, this ringworm and superficial mycoses. We have some other agents here that can cause some of these issues. Trichophyton, microsporum, and epidermophyton. All right, those are three other agents there. These vary kind of by geographic location, but they're not restricted to just one genus or species. You may be familiar with the fact that some of these you can actually pass between you and your pets, okay? And so these are dermatophytes, all right, and they have the ability to digest keratin. Remember, the keratin is part of our first line of defense. However, they do not invade the deeper epidermal layers, all right? And so these are spread via direct contact, occasionally indirect, with humans and other infected animals. Therapy is usually going to be a topical antifungal ointment. Remember, anytime we're dealing with anything that is fungal in nature, those are also eukaryotes. So that's the same that we're eukaryotes. And so anything that we use to try to destroy them, we are also using on our skin, on our cells. Sorry, I'm just thinking about skin here, on our cells. So it makes it very hard to treat. So this is why we will often find it in a topical form, okay? Especially if at all possible, they're going to avoid systemic treatment. And so some drugs work by speeding up that loss of the skin layer, okay? And so you're going to usually have cosmetic effects instead of disease-causing effects. Tinea versicolor is one that you can also see is caused by Malacia. That's a genus that has at least 10 different species that live on the skin. It can feed on oil and high content of your skin glands. You can have also occur with that folliculitis. Sometimes it can it is implicated in things like psoriasis or seborrheic dermatitis, which is kind of a severe form of dandruff. It is carried by almost 100% of humans tested can be carriers for this. Okay, so let's move on to the eye. So we're going to look mostly at the exposed surfaces that are most vulnerable to infection. Okay, so we're going to look at the conjunctiva, which is a thin membrane-like tissue. You can see that conjunctiva is here. Okay, this is going to cover the eye, except for the cornea, and line the eyelids. And it's going to secrete an oil and mucus-containing fluid whose function is to lubricate and protect your eye surface. We then have the cornea, all right, you can see that cornea right here. Okay, the cornea is kind of dome-shaped central portion of the eye. It is over the iris. It has 5 to 6 layers of epithelial cells that are going to quickly regenerate if you have damage, and this is often called the windshield, so to speak, of the eye. It's protective in nature. Tears are the eye's best line of defense. They're going to have an aqueous or watery type fluid, a little bit of oil and mucus in them. They're going to be formed in the lacrimal gland or tear duct at the outer and upper corner of each eye, and then drain into the lacrimal duct, which is actually the tear duct itself. So the aqueous portion is going to have lysosomes and lactoferrin. These are antimicrobial substances. The mucus layer also has some proteins and sugars that are protective in nature as well. And then, of course, we have the general flow of fluids that are going to flush microbes out, okay, to help prevent attachment of microorganisms. So anything that hinders the vision is going to be considered counterproductive. So inflammation does not occur in the eye as readily as it does elsewhere in the body, all right, because that would be counterproductive for sight. You can't flood the eye with light diffracting objects like lymphocytes and phagocytes, or it would constantly blur your vision. So this is introducing what we call the effect of what we call immune privilege. And this is where of necessity, evolution of the vertebrate eye and some other areas has reduced the innate immunity system in this particular area because it would be counterproductive to function of this particular organ. So we used to think there was no normal biota of the eye, but we have discovered that it is larger and more numerous and diverse than we once thought before. This is going to include Corynebacterium, Propionibacterium, and some yeast generally. Okay, so conjunctivitis is infection of the conjunctiva and is relatively common. It can be caused by specific microorganisms, contaminants that proliferate due to the presence of contact lens or an eye injury, accidental inoculation due to trauma. The signs and symptoms for a bacterial infection, you're going to get a milky kind of a discharge. A viral infection is going to produce generally a more clear, watery type of discharge. Watery exudate is sometimes how it's put. So patients will often wake up in the morning with that glued shut eye with secretions that have accumulated and solidified overnight. So you're going to have all that eye junk everywhere. Some conjunctivitis cases are caused by allergic reactions or allergic responses, and you'll have a clear watery fluid there. The common name for conjunctivitis is, of course, pink eye. So you can have bacterial or viral causes of pink eye. And, of course, we even said allergies sometimes. So it's pretty gross looking over here, but you can see that classic gunk coming from the eye when you have pink eye, right? So a viral conjunctivitis is often caused by adenovirus. Neonatal eye infections can be caused by Neisseria gonorrhea or Chlamydia trachomatis. And those are going to be transmitted vertically, so from the genital tract of the mother who has an infection of one of the two, and that can actually lead to serious eye damage if not treated promptly. Herpes simplex can also cause neonatal conjunctivitis, and and that's going to be accompanied by a generalized herpes infection. Bacterial conjunctivitis in other age groups can be caused by Staphylococcus epidermidis, so staph epi, strep pyogenes, Streptococcus pneumonia, Haemophilus influenzae, or Moraxella. All right, Moraxella. Is it on here? It is. It's on here. Okay. Neisseria gonorrhea, or chlamydia trachomatis. Conjunctivitis can result from an inoculation from a genital infection or sexual activity. A wide variety of bacteria, fungi, protozoa can actually contaminate in contact lenses and be transferred to the eye. So it is very important to follow directions when you're using contact lenses, and to never use tap water, because that can introduce protozoa amoeba, which are actually brain-eating amoeba. So definitely a no-no. Do not use tap water to rinse your contacts in. You need to buy the saline solution. So let's see. Both bacterial and viral conjunctivitis are transmissible by direct contact and are very contagious. Treatment of non-neonatal cases, you're going to use ciprofloxacin because it covers any bacterial infection that you may have. Sometimes they can prescribe a prophylactic antibiotic, even if the viral case is suspected, because it can cause a secondary infection. And if it doesn't improve within 48 hours, you may want to look a little deeper and see what particular microbe is causing this, so it can be treated. So keratitis is usually caused by herpes simplex. This is an infection of the cornea, and it's kind of a melting type infection here. That means it just kind of melts away the cornea, and it can destroy the cornea, and it can cause blindness. This can occur through sexual transmission. This can become latent and reactivate during times of stress. Your signs and symptoms are going to be invasion of deeper eye tissues. It can lead to that, like I said, complete destruction of your eye and cause blindness. There are miscellaneous bacteria can cause the keratitis. Herpes simplex virus is one of those. Kind of a misdirected reactivation of herpes simplex 1. So the virus can travel to the ophthalmic nerve rather than the mandibular branch of the trigeminal nerve, which is what it can often do, and it kind of gets in the wrong place. Infections with herpes simplex 2 can be caused by a sexual encounter or transfer of the virus from the genital area to the eye. You will diagnose this by viral culture or polymerase chain reaction if needed. Treatment is going to be acyclovir, trifluridine, or both of them. You can also have keratitis by acantha amoeba. Okay, so this is the amoeba that can cause the keratitis in people that wear contact lens. So that is why this is a free-living amoeba in tap water, fresh water. All right, so this is why you do not use tap water for putting your contact lens, okay? Use the saline solution. This is kind of just a good overview of all the particular things for this system, or systems. We have the skin and the eyes here. And so these are good review little pictures here. I think these are in every chapter. I probably don't have them in every PowerPoint, but you will find these in every chapter, and they are color-coded. Here's a good color-coding theme to help you maybe with some color coding for your flashcards. So helminths, they have an orange, bacteria brown, viruses green, protozoa red, and fungi blue. And so you could write the name of each species in that particular color, and that would help you keep track of what they are. Is it a virus? Is it a bacteria? Is it a helminth? So just a suggestion there. And that's going to wrap us up for chapter 16.